はい、改めまして4時になりましたので、国会エネルギー調査会、準備会と、そしていつもお世話になります、飯田さんたち、今日は何としてご紹介しましょうか。有識者の皆さんと一緒に、営農ソーラー国際公開シンポジウムを開催をさせていただきます。では冒頭、国会の中で、超党派でエネルギー問題をしっかりと論じていこうという原発ゼロ再エネ100の会の共同代表の近藤昭一さんの方からご挨拶いたします。
皆さんこんにちは。ご紹介を受けました、原発ゼロ再エネ100の会の共同代表をしております衆議院議員の近藤昭一でございます。この原発ゼロ再エネ100の会というのは、日本では東日本大震災が発災をし、東電福島第一原発事故があったわけであります。残念ながら万が一の事故があり、そして計り知れない大きな影響があった。こういう中で、まさしく原発をゼロにしていかなければならない。その分、しかしながら一方で、しっかりとエネルギーは守っていかなくてはならないということで、再エネ100の会という名称で活動しております。会自体は、東日本大震災が発生する前からありました。そして、この会がですね、この国会の中で、改めてしっかりとエネルギーを考えていかなくてはならないんだと。こういうことで、国会エネルギー調査会というものを主催をしているわけであります。これには、この後お話をいただく、国会エネルギー調査会の有識者チームの皆さんに、専門的な観点から様々なご意見をいただきながら、国会議員が、また多くの皆さんと一緒に議論をしているところであります。ただ、この国会エネルギー調査会、詳しく申し上げますと、各個準備会というのがついております。準備会であります。しかし、準備会にもかかわらず今日は103回ということになるわけであります。残念ながら、きちっとですね、今の政権が国会の中にこうした調査会を置かないと、こういう現実の中で、しかしながら、先ほど申し上げましたように、しっかりと再エネを進めていく、原発をなくしていく、そのためというか、そういう中でしっかりとエネルギーを調査をしていこうと、こういうことで主してこの間続けさせていただいているところであります。今日は我々の国会エネルギー調査会に有識者チームの皆さんの参加もいただいて、各国の状況、残念ながら日本はですね、いわゆるソーラーシェアリングというのはなかなか進んでないところがあるわけであります。そういう中で各国、ドイツ、フランス、あるいは米国、あるいはアジアでも各国など、様々な国はこうしたことに対して積極的に取り組んで、非常に成果を上げられているということで、我々としてもそうした情報をしっかりと共有して、今後に向けていきたいと行うように考えておりますので、今日はよろしくお願いいたします。
はい、ありがとうございます。今日はこのシンポジウムに、元総理大臣で、菅直人さん、この、営農型のソーラーシェアリングに大変熱心でありまして、ご参加いただいておりますので、あらかじめご紹介をさせていただきます。また、後ほどよろしくお願い申し上げます。では、これからの司会は、飯田さんの方で、取り仕切っていただきます。よろしくお願いします。
はい。国会調査会準備会の有識者チーム側の事務局長をしております。環境衛生研究所所長の飯田になります。開会趣旨を私の方から述べることになってますので、今回ですね、実はこの数年前から、世界的には営農型太陽発電、営農ソーラーが急激に関心が高まって、実際の実践研究、政策等もですね、広がってきていますが、それは、世界的には、いわゆる脱炭素、脱化石燃料で、できれば脱原発も含めて、やる、一丁目一番地は太陽光発電と風力発電で、これで、いわゆる電力はもちろんエネルギーのすべてを再エネにしていく、その中心が太陽光という共通認識が広がって、そして今や日本のほとんどの国で太陽光と風力は一番安いエネルギー源になって、この先も、もっと安くなる。そして膨大なポテンシャルがあるということで、しかもほぼ無尽蔵であるということからですね、これをどう広げていくか。 ただしかしながら太陽光はどこの国でも、いわゆる形式的には場所を取るので、場所をめぐるコンフリクトがある。で、これまで日本は今世界で3番目の太陽光発電大国ですが、世界全体の太陽光発電の電力は今、だいたい 4% ぐらいで、この10年で40倍に広がったんですが、もっとこれを数十倍広げなきゃいけないんですね。電力 100%、さらに一次エネルギー、セクターカップリングも含めて一次エネルギーも太陽光とやろうとすると、この先さらにまだ数十倍広げなきゃいけないというふうにすると、どこにポテンシャルがあるのか、そしてそれが社会とかですね、自然環境とかそういうものに、できるだけ影響を及ぼさない形で、やろうとすると、これは後でちょっとプレゼンがあるので、できるだけその中でですね、大きなポテンシャルがあって、すでに人の土地が手が入っていて、しかも食料の生産、いわゆる農業とも共存し得る営農型太陽光発電というのが、急激に会社を作ったということで、日本はですね、これに関しては本当にパイオニアで、4000件近い3000数百件がすでに件数としては入っていて、これは世界でトップです。ただし、小さいのが多いので、日本の太陽光全体の中では、わずか 0.2% 以下ですが、ただ日本の経験は世界にいろいろ伝えることができます。同時に、今、研究と政策と実践と技術がですね、急激に発展していますので、今度日本は今度世界から学ぶこともできる。お互いに学ぶ、今日は、ここにたいかな。で、4年前から国際、この営農型大活動、一番、世界中にいろいろあるんですが、一番中心の国際会議が、この今日来ているメンバーを中心に、4年前からまずフランスで第1回目で、その次、ドイツ。これは残念ながらコロナでどちらもオンラインなんですが、去年イタリアで初めてリアル。で、先週韓国で第4回目。その流れでですね、今回40名規模の営農型太陽光発電の世界のトップの研究者が日本に来ていただいて、千葉とか福島を見て、今日、この東京でですね、主に政策を中心にディスカッションしようという趣旨で、来ていただいたという流れになっています。ということで、記念すべきですね、この営農型太陽発電、国際的な、本格的なディスカッションができる、第1回目ということなので、今日は、同時に国会議員、それから各省庁を来ていただいてますので、いろいろと議論できればと思います。よろしくお願いします。では、では、第1人目は、ドイツのフランクフォーバー太陽エネルギーシステム研究所の営農ソーラーグループ長の、マックス・トロントストという方がいるんですが、さんの方からまずドイツの方からお願いします。
Thank you, Lindsay. Thanks everybody for being here. It's a big honor, and it's also like a historical moment to initiate this international collaboration with all of you. So, Germany shut down its last nuclear power plant. Just yesterday, we were visiting Fukushima and talked to farmers and people who were directly affected by the disaster more than 30 years ago. And this shows that what happens in our countries matters for each other. We observe, we learn from each other, and in this case, it was an important event which brought us in Germany to rethink nuclear power and to finally step out of it. I hope that this moment contributes that we step in to something which is providing a safer and more environment-friendly future. And I believe that agriculture can play a big contribution for the large challenges which are lying in front of us. My name is Max Tromsdorf. I'm working at the Fraunhofer Institute for Solar Energy Systems. And since approximately 9 years, I'm working in the field of agrivoltaics through land use. And the situation of Japan is very unique in the world. We've heard it already. But our wish is to learn more from the experience you have here made in the last years and to derive what we in Germany, France, US, Korea, and many other countries which are about to start agrivoltaics can do better and be aware of what we have to be considering in order to maintain the high potential, to do it together with farmers, together with local citizens, and especially in this very early moment, we just heard that we're just about to enter the solar energy age of humanity. That here, we know that agrivoltaics can play a major role, but to really make agrivoltaics flourishing, we have to take the right decisions, to know what we are talking about, to understand the main principles that are involved in agrivoltaics, and finally, but most important, to talk about it. There are so many stakeholders and so many different countries and disciplines involved that without this exchange of communication, it will be much more difficult and maybe potential that agrivoltaics may have for protecting the environment, for reducing water use, for poverty reduction in rural areas, for protecting crops against hazards of climate change and many other factors. So let me introduce you into one important step we took in Germany. We are not very advanced in terms of implementation of agrivoltaics. We just have 20 megawatts, approximately 20 facilities installed. But a strong effort we put into creating a common understanding of what agrivoltaics actually is. And so, before I continue, just one word to our founder of Fraunhofer ISE, that was Adolf Götzberger. He was the first person who published the idea of agrivoltaics more than 40 years ago already. And we're still thankful for his efforts and inspirations that still drives us at Fraunhofer ISE. He just passed away approximately 2 months ago. And we, if he could see us here today sitting together with these many different nations, we would be, of course, very happy. So let's jump over the first slides and go directly to the pictures which are showing the great diversity of agrivoltaic systems. Depending on what is growing below or in between the panels, the facilities look very different. It can be large systems which are allowing agriculture machinery for arable farming. If you just slide slowly through the next slides, it shows arable farming with tracked PV modules, horticultural applications which protect the crops, huge 2D, 3D tracked systems, integration of closed agricultural systems with fall tunnels. It could be also with animal husbandry in permanent grassland applications, even over aquaculture bodies or animal husbandry and vertical installations like the one on the last slide here. So how to get to a common understanding if the diversity is so large? That's why in Germany we didn't focus at some technical measurements. We also discussed in the last days some like ground coverage ratio and so on, but rather focused at the global idea, which is a main agricultural activity of the land. And to assure this main land use as the agricultural use, we set certain criteria which have to be fulfilled in order to be considered as an agrivoltaic system.
So the primary use is agriculture's electricity production comes second, and the rules of agriculture have to be considered. If you go to the next slide, we see some key facts. It was published 2 years ago by a consortium of 15 partners after a 1.5 years process, according to the guidelines of the German Institute for Normalization. And if you go to the next slides, we see the main criteria with this, first of all, a 66% minimum agricultural yield compared to a system without agrivoltaics. And here already the question arose many times the last days, how to calculate the reference yield, how to control for it, and in the end, how to sanctionize if these 66% are not met. And I think that's also some input for the discussion later on, and because it's not always so easy, and it might have crucial implications on the bankability on the one hand side, and on the other side of the on the social acceptance if there's not a sufficiently high agricultural activity involved. We differentiate between overhead and ground-mounted systems, which is category 1, overhead, where land losses can account to a maximum of 10%, and category 2, with a vertical clearance below 2.10 meters, which can include land losses up to 15%. The systems have to avoid soil damages, soil erosion, and have to consider light and water availability and distribution that a proper agricultural activity can continue. After the installation of the system, we have to be able to dismantle the facility with no larger damages to the soil. And we can continue to the next slide, which is just showing the 2 categories with the 4 different application areas: horticultural, arable farming, and permanent grassland. But we can directly continue to not only the next, but also the next slide. One more, and then due to the lack of Italian colleagues in this round, I'll also present one guideline which was developed just summer of last year. It was a process initiated by the Ministry of Environment and Energy Security, the Italian MITE, and was conducted by 4 institutes under the lead of the National Agency for New Technologies, Energy and Sustainable Economic Development, ENEA. And the idea here is to have different requirements that have to be fulfilled in order to get a certain status. And I will briefly guide you through these 5 different requirements. On the next slide, requirement A is stating technical requirements before the installation. And there 2 main criteria are that at least 70% of the area have to be devoted to the agricultural activity. That means here Italy allows for 30% of land losses, not only 15% as in Germany. And a second important criteria for requirement A is that also the module area can be just a maximum of 40% compared to the land area. So that's a criterion which is also discussed in France and Taiwan, and we'll hear more about this later. Requirement B is focusing on the operational aspects of the facility. And here the continuation of the agricultural activity is the most important one. But there's also a requirement regarding the electricity production. And here we have a threshold of 60% minimum electricity production compared to a ground-mounted standard PV system. We continue with requirement C, which is just splitting the approaches up into 3 different approaches. First one, similar to Germany, the overhead agrivoltaics. Type 2, interspace agrivoltaics, but Italy here introduced a 3rd type, which is the vertical agrivoltaics approach, which in Germany is included in the category 2. Here it's an own category. We continue with requirements D and E, which are both targeting at an included monitoring system to different extents. Requirement D is including it's addressing at a monitoring system to verify the impact of the system on crops, water savings, and agricultural productivity. While finally, the more advanced monitoring system in requirement E is also enabling the verification on soil fertility recovery, microclimate, and climate change resilience. So if the first two of the requirements are met, the guidelines say that's an agrivoltaic facility. Only if the four first ABCD requirements are met, then it's defined as an advanced agrivoltaic system. And if all five requirements are met, also the advanced monitoring system, then these facilities can have access to the PNRR grants in Italy. But how this is put into practice, it's still open, because so far the Italian guidelines are not connected to the legislation. In contrast to Germany, in Germany we have already 4 different legislations now connecting to the German DINSPEC, which are, in a nutshell, the taxation of the land, the feed-in tariffs for electricity, the receivement of the agricultural subsidies, and finally, in a draft version, also a faster permitting procedure towards the building permit. But this last point just addresses small systems with a system size of below 2.5 hectares. So as an overview, that's from my side. I'm now either directly handing over to my colleague Christian Duprat from France, or back to you, Makoto.
No, it's go ahead. All right. すいません。ですね、質問を受け付けたいんですけれども、議論の時間にいっぱい時間を取りたいので、質問等もその時にしていただくということで、続いて、フランスからですね、ご報告をいただきます。クリスチャン・ドゥプラス博士はですね、フランスの国立農業食料研究所、インレイというんですが、これはヨーロッパ最大の研究機関です。先ほどのフランホーファー研究所っていうのはドイツ最大の研究所なんですけども、そこでアグロフォレストリー及び営農ソーラーの上級研究をされていらっしゃいます。で、アグロフォレストリーはもう数十年研究されてきて、非常に対価であられます。その話もプレゼンの中であると思います。それではよろしくお願いします。
Okay. This is the one. Thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy and impressed to have the opportunity to share the French experience in agrivoltaics. So I will tell you about the past, what's the current situation, and what are the prospects for using agrivoltaics. The first slide is some aspects of agrivoltaic systems in France. They are quite similar to what we have seen in Japan, or what you have seen on the slides from Germany. Maybe we have a slight difference because we have a lot of fruit trees systems with agrivoltaics in France. So we protect orchards, we protect vineyards, we protect perennial crops like that with the systems. So that's the example of the peach tree in the center image. Next slide. So for the idea for France about agrivoltaics comes from a very difficult question that we have to address. We need PV, we need photovoltaic electricity, and we need places to put the PV panels. And we've been doing a review of all the roofs of the houses, of all the industry facilities, of all the commercial facilities, all of the abandoned land, and so and so. And it's not enough. It's not enough to meet our targets in photovoltaic electricity. So the idea is to go on the agricultural land, but this is not so easy, as you will see in a moment. Our President Macron, has set the scene for a 100 gigawatt target of PV electricity in 2050, which is huge. It's about 10 times what we have at the moment, or 8 times what we have at the moment. So we need places to put that. Next slide. Okay. I should remember you that France has 30 million hectares of cropland. And if we just used agrivoltaics on 1% of France's cropland, we would produce as much electricity as our 56 nuclear reactors that we have today. So it's really an opportunity to go to a different mix system for electricity. And it's only 1% of the cropland in France. So that's an option that should be considered. But we have strong opposition, strong contest from the civil society and from some farmers' union that want not to put PV panels on cropland. So agrivoltaics try to match the two, and we will see how we can make that. Next slide. So at the moment, we have big, large, huge PV projects in France. Some are above 1,000 hectares, engaging many landowners and powerful electricity companies. And these projects are usually not agrivoltaics. They are ground-mounted PV. Sometimes they call themselves agrivoltaics, but when you look more precisely at the project, it's not really true. This is an example of a huge project where they intend to replace corn, maize cultivation with ground-mounted PV in southwest France. Next slide. The idea to go to agrivoltaics came from the comparison between agroforestry. Agroforestry is trees and crops together on the same plot. I have been working on that for 35 years. And the idea is to replace the trees with PV panels, and that gives agrivoltaism. And next slide. This is the first prototype of agrivoltaism in France and probably in Europe. It was in 2010 that we built that prototype. It's in Montpellier, in the south of France. And we have been monitoring different crops under this system for the last 13 years. At the beginning, you see you have vegetables, salads, and on the left, we have corn. It depends on the years. Next slide. So we published the first paper on this in 2011, where we defined the word agrivoltaic. We didn't know at that time that it was already existing in Japan under the name of solar sharing. So we just do it in a parallel ways without knowing each other's. Next one. So at the moment, we have a lot of research on agrivoltaics in France. I belong to the National Institute for Agronomical and Environmental Research in France, which is the leading institute for research in agriculture in France. So we have been doing 14 years of research. We have defined the dynamic agrivoltaics concept. We will go into that in a few minutes. We do a lot of agronomical studies on the production of crops under the panels, up to now 7 PhD theses. We do a lot of ecophysiological studies in controlled conditions, and we have many industrial partners, more than 10 different companies. And on the map of France, here you have the location of all the experiments where my institute is involved. Next slide. These are just examples of such experiments. This one is with the REMTech technology, the 2-axis mobile panels on trackers. It's close to Paris, this one. Next one. This is with vertical agrivoltaics with next to sun panels, and it's in the middle of France, in the center of France, with cattle grazing. Next one. This is an example of a different approach with a textile, and a PV textile that can be used and folded and put in PV in glass houses, for example, to protect the crops and produce electricity at the same time. Next time. And this is the dynamic agrivoltaism concept that we invented in 2012. It's mobile panels on only one axis trackers. So they face the east in the morning, they are flat by midday, and they face the west in the evening. And we use them to protect the crops against climate change. We have a lot of heat, drought, or even frost in France that are related to climate change. And these panels, you can manage them just to put shade on the crop when the crop needs shade, or to put light on the crop when the crops need light. Or you can put them flat during the night to avoid heavy frost below. So this is the way we use them. Next slide. So with this system, we protect mostly fruit trees, vineyards, and this is an example of a farmer who is doing one system with apple, cherry, plum, peach, pear, apricot, kiwi, and vineyards in his system on 2 hectares. And this was just put into service last month. Next. We also use these mobile panels on glass houses. On the top left, you have an example of a so-called agrivoltaic glass house that was built in France. A lot of them were built in France during the last 10 years, but unfortunately, they are really too dark inside to grow crops. Or you have very specialty crops that may cope with the shade, but not that much. And at the moment, we have more than 200 hectares of such glass houses that have no crops at all, because the farmers decided not to crop. The crop yield was really too low. So we have the new concept with the mobile panels. We have less panels on the glass houses, and you can adapt the shade into the glass houses. And in that case, we have very good results. Next one. So there is a debate, a controversy at the moment in France, how to make sure that the projects are compatible with crop yield, that the crops will produce enough. And this is just a relationship between what we call the ground coverage ratio of the system, which is the area of panels to the area of ground. In conventional ground-mounted systems, this ratio is between 50 to 65%. And here you have ratios going from 20% or 17% to 50%. And you have the relative yield, the yield under the panels to the yield in the full sun. And you see that the decrease is quite sharp as soon as you are above 30% of coverage. So this is into discussion. Should we limit the systems and tell the farmers you should produce at least 80% of the crop yield, just like in Japan, or 66% like in Germany? Or should we limit the density of panels to make sure that the crops can grow well? And in that case, you don't need to control the crop yield. So that's an issue that is debated, but is not decided so far. Next one. So we have a new association in France that's called France Agrivoltaïsme, where most of the companies that are making agrivoltaïsme are members of, and the farmers' unions are also members, and they are all discussing about improving the systems and pushing for laws that will help to make this transition to agrivoltaïsm. We also have, like the Germans have the DIN standards, we have the AFNOR standard in France, and this standard will help to certify that the projects are really agrivoltaic. And the position in France is that we should go to a positive agrivoltaic concept where the crop yield is unaffected or even improved by the system. Next one. So the final lessons, maybe for comparison with Japan, we should have we could have a 100,000 hectares target for agrivoltaics in France. That would be very significant in the electrical mix of France and very acceptable for the mix. So we have two options to do that. Or we do small projects, maybe 1 hectare project, and we have 100,000 farmers that are using agrivoltaics, or we make big, large projects, say 1,000 projects, and we have only 100 farmers that can have this system. So that's a political decision, and it's under this discussion if we should go to large or small projects. We also need to avoid land speculation, because if you pay too much to the landowner for having an agrivoltaic system, landowners will disagree to rent their land for farmers. And this is very dangerous. So it happens in some areas. So we have to be very cautious about that. Okay, so next one. That's a joke about electrical fields, but farmers are quite concerned about that. So to make people more happy with that, we have been drafting a law, and there is a law that was passed by the parliament, and we will see it in the next slides. So if you can come back to the slides that were on the screen at the beginning, there are a few slides about the legal framework in France at the moment. So that's it. Okay, next one. So France is not in a front runner for PV electricity. We lag behind Germany, and we have more sun than Germany, which is not great. So we need to go further on that, but there are fears that an uncontrolled development of PV on cropland would be a disaster. So that's why we had a law that was passed last month by the French Parliament. Next one. So that's the law for the acceleration of renewable energies. It was voted on March 10, so a month ago. It prohibits ground-mounted photovoltaics on agricultural land or on forest land. You are not allowed to clear forest to put PV panels. It defines what is agrivoltaics, and it encourages the development of agrivoltaics. Next one. So in France, if you do a photovoltaic plant that is above 250 kilowatt peak, you need to go through a very constrained process, including an impact assessment on the environment, a public inquiry. Everybody is asked to give his opinion about your project, and it should be validated at the end by the authorities, including the local authorities. Next one. So the law that we just passed defines agrivoltaics as a tool that will improve agriculture. It should be a tool to protect crops, to improve the results of agriculture. So of course it will produce electricity, but it has to improve agricultural production. It has to help to adapt the crop to climate change. And so to protect crops and animals against hazards or against climate difficulties. So agricultural production is a priority in all our projects, and they also should be reversible. Dismantling provisions are compulsory to dismantle the system at the end of the exploitation. Next one. So the law tries also to protect the farmer incomes and to prevent land speculation. Next. It gives an authorization for a limited period. Then it should be dismantled. And it ensures the control by local authorities, including a very important commission that we call the CDPNAF, where all the farmers' union, the environmental NGOs, the state services are included, and they discuss the project, and they should give a green light for the project to be realized. Next. So we hope, so the system should be useful for production, and the land is considered as agricultural land. It's not changed. So that allows that the common agricultural policy payments are still allowed to the farmers. Next. And that's it. That's it. Next slide. So what we decided in France is that as agrivoltaic systems are elevated, they are more costly to build than ground-mounted systems. So we have a tender for projects in France by the French authorities, and agrivoltaics is classified as an elevated shade system, just as parking photovoltaic shelters. So they are in the same category, and this accounts for the higher leverage cost of electricity produced in those kind of systems. Next one. At the moment, there is another law in discussion in the parliament that will be specific to agrivoltaics to speed again the process for agrivoltaics. I think that's all. Oh yes, a few words about the comparison between Japan and France. So the minimum 80% yield limit assumed in Japan is not included so far in the French regulation. It should be 100% in France, so which makes difficulties. We have a label to sort good and poor projects. We are discussing a ground coverage ratio limit for the project. And the decision in France is that a field where you have an agrivoltaic system is still agriculture, nothing else. And we have the same problem of social acceptance as you have in Japan. Well, that's it. I think it was the last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Christian. Okay. ありがとうございます。それでは続きまして、米国、アメリカ合衆国ですね、からご報告いただきます。トーマス・ヒッキー氏の方からご報告をいただきます。トーマス・ヒッキー氏はですね、米国の国立再生可能エネルギー研究所、NREL の研究開発部門で、アグロフォレストリー、営農太陽光発電を担当されています。で、同時にコロラド大学にも所属されています。今、コロラドとアリゾナはですね、本当もう世界的にも、営農ソーラーの研究が非常に進んでいる、地域になっています。で、来年の、第5回、営農ソーラー国際会議も、コロラドで、開催されることが決まっております。で、スタートは遅れたんですけれども、今非常に米国のソーラーシェアリング業界というのは伸びています。で、その様子についてご報告いただきます。はい。よろしくお願いします。
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's been a wonderful day. It's really an honor to be here and have this opportunity to present on behalf of the United States and the National Renewable Energy Lab. It has been, like I said, a wonderful day. We started in here at 8 a.m. So I'm a little bit concerned if we turn the lights down again, I may have to take a nap. But yes, I'm here with National Renewable Energy Lab, and I'll be presenting on agrivoltaic policy in practice. At NREL, we are studying agrivoltaics both in the field and then also looking at policy at the same time, hand in hand. We believe that we can create informed policy and science-based policy through this approach. So to start off, just a little bit about our photovoltaic landscape in the US. Solar energy is quickly becoming the #1 source of new energy generation capacity. The graph in the top right shows over the past 23 years, we've shifted from more natural gas, fossil fuels towards renewable energy like wind and solar, which is shown in the yellow. And we're also adding battery capacity at the same time nowadays. The graph in the bottom right shows different scenarios by the year 2050 that we're hoping to achieve near carbon-free grid, reduce the carbon, and you can see as well solar is in the yellow, so it's a big portion of the overall generating capacity in all scenarios. And so if we are to achieve these goals as a country, like we heard from Christian a second ago, it brings up this question, where do we put all the solar energy? And the most likely answer is on agricultural lands. It is convenient to do so. It's generally flat and close to transmission lines, close to other infrastructure that makes it all possible. I've also included a couple of maps here to show the agriculture landscape in our country, and also a smaller map there for scale between our two countries. And you can see that in the US, we do have quite a bit of land, and about 50% of that land is currently used for agriculture in some way. I also want to note the differences in irradiance and kind of where the high solar potential in the US is. And we can see from this map that in the South and the Southwest, we have great potential for solar energy. And that's also an area where we grow a lot of our country's fruit crops and vegetable crops. So when we pair those two things, we have this opportunity for agrivoltaics. And so that's our vision, right? Combining the two, solar and agriculture, to have mutual benefits that we've heard a little bit about here. I do want to note that we consider agrivoltaics to be crop production, to be livestock grazing or animal husbandry, commodity crops as well. But at the same time, we do consider pollinator habitat and ecosystem services in that mix for now. At NREL, we view the agrivoltaic transition kind of in two different ways. So across the top row there, we have traditional utility scale configurations where we would more retroactively include agriculture into these scenarios. And then alternatively at the bottom row there, we are starting to introduce new configurations where we elevate the panels or spread them out, or maybe integrate them into greenhouse structures. Again, we just saw some of those applications in the previous presentations. At NREL, we're currently documenting all of the agrivoltaic sites that we have across the country in a map. It's an interactive map. And right now we have 314 sites that we have documented. You can see there's a large cluster in the middle there that is largely pollinator habitat or ecosystem services, shown with the little bee icons. And now transitioning into the policy part of this presentation, just to outline the different levels of government that we have. We have the federal level, the state level, the local level. And at the federal level, it's more of an overarching authority over all 50 states. They help regulate different industries. Some examples would be the Department of Energy and Department of Agriculture, that would be relative to agrivoltaics, similar to the ministries here in Japan. And they can also incentivize different programs and different initiatives. At the state level, each of those 50 states actually do have a lot of freedom as well to create their own laws, depending on where they're at in the country, the political landscape, what the constituents want. And then moving one step further to the local level. At the local level, they actually have the final determination and the final say over siting and zoning regulations. And utility companies or energy companies also exist at this level, pretty localized. So now I'll dive in a little bit deeper to each of those different levels, outlining how they are pertinent and how they pertain to agrivoltaics. So like I said, at the federal level, the USDA and the Department of Energy have both given out several $1 million in grant funding in recent years to study agrivoltaics. So this is federal money for research and development for agrivoltaics specifically at different scales, and there are multi-university projects going on, so we can start to learn about what agrivoltaics means for our country and then disseminate that knowledge. At the same time, the federal government is incentivizing renewable energy. Recently, just last year, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, and this was a monumental policy for our country. Important to renewable energy and agriculture was energy security and climate change subsection of that. So $369 billion US for renewable energy. Taxpayers also can benefit from this program. All these examples on the right here, taxpayers can get a break or a return if they want to install solar or battery storage or even purchase an electric vehicle. And then that bottom bullet point highlights nearly $20 billion for climate smart agriculture. And part of that is being allocated through the U.S. Department of Agriculture REAP program, where some of this grant funding goes directly to farmers and directly to agriculture producers if they wish to move towards energy efficiency programs or install solar. So that's one way that agrivoltaics could benefit somewhat indirectly from this program. And now moving to the state level, here we see a map on the right, and you can see just how dynamic the landscape is with state level policy. This is showing the different solar programs for each state, not necessarily specific to agrivoltaics, but just to give an idea. However, there are a few states that do have agrivoltaic-based programs. The state of New York is one, and then the state of Illinois is another. And both of these states have a solar scorecard type of initiatives where if the solar developer proposes to do agriculture or dual land use with their project, then they get priority in that bid process. So it is more likely for them that they'll get the project built and put out into the world. I want to focus a little bit more attention on the state of Massachusetts. They have the longest standing agrivoltaic policy at the state level. They have a set of requirements or parameters similar to what we're seeing in France. They have a requirement for a system size. The height of the installation must be 2.5 meters above the ground. Shading, less than 50% shading on the ground, and they actually use a software tool to understand what that shading pattern will look like. And then they also have to report over a 20-year period back to a third party. So the intention behind this was to incentivize more agrivoltaic production through a feed-in tariff of, so if the system meets all these requirements, they would get 6 cents per kilowatt hour adder. And then somewhat moving back, but also moving forward here, just going back to the solar scorecard idea, there are 15 different states that have some form of a solar scorecard, and this has been a big driver for non-crop agrivoltaic projects. It has been, very, very helpful to get these projects put out into the world, and it does promote the dual land use. These scorecards are voluntary, but they have been very effective. And if we advance one more here, we can see just the overlap between states that do have a solar scorecard and where we are documenting agrivoltaic sites across our country. And lastly, the local level for policy. Like I said, at the local level, they have the final say over zoning ordinances and if that land is zoned agricultural or industrial, and that has a big impact on how solar projects are put into the world. Right now, nobody recognizes dual land use, and so that brings a lot of uncertainty at the local level. There has been a lot of pushback from local communities, especially in rural areas. So the projects that have been successful have done a rigorous public acceptance type of protocol, and they also have done a rigorous environmental impact analysis to make sure the project will be successful. And then a case study here from the state of Illinois. This shows, again, how dynamic at the county level now things can be. So this map here is showing several different counties' solar ordinances, not necessarily agrivoltaics, but it gives an idea for a developer. It increases the complexity of a project and it can really impact the project design, economics, and the return on investment. So in conclusion here, at the federal level, we do not have a formal agrivoltaic policy in place. With that, we do have a lot of research funding that is being given out to research institutes and different universities to study this. So policy may come with time. At the state level, we are seeing some states incentivizing and prioritizing the dual land use. And many states are considering moving that way as well. So I think that we'll see more state level policy before we see a federal policy because of that. And then again, local level, we'll see some future shifts in zoning and ordinances. Maybe we can take some knowledge from France here and keep the land zoned agriculture, even though we're installing solar with it, if we follow the right parameters. So I thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to discuss.
トーマス、ありがとう。それでですね、これで第1部終了です。で、第2部はですね、あと45分ぐらい時間があるんですけれども、ラウンドテーブル形式で今から議論を行いたいと思います。で、講師の方に加えてですね、台湾から台湾工業技術研究院、イットリーの準研究をされておられます、ペイシン・リー博士にも参加いただきます。で、これフロアの方にもどんどん意見を出していただいて、双方向的に進めたいと思いますのでよろしくお願いします。残念ながらオンラインの方の意見はちょっと聞けませんので、本日はご容赦願いたいと思います。会場に来ていただいた方の特権などで、ぜひご発言をよろしくお願いします。それではですね、まず、トピックなんですが、今まで聞いていただいたようにですね、各国で、これやられてるんですけど、同じような問題を抱えているなという部分があります。やはり農業っていうのは非常に大切。でも、やはり電気もやらなきゃいけない。で、太陽光っていうのは本当に、今、どんどん伸びている分野で、太陽光と農業。これは敵地が同じなんですね。農業をうまく保護しつつ、発電も増やしていくと。こういったことに、政府とかですね、政策、制度、規制、こういったものがどういったあり方が一番いいのかっていうのを今本当に考えるいい機会だということで、お互いの利益になるような議論ができたらなと思っております。で、まず、皮切りとしてですね、問題提起を、弊社の環境エネルギー政策研究所所長の飯田哲成より、問題提起っていうのをさせていただいて、その上で議論したいと思います。よろしくお願いします。
はい、時間限られているので、身近に、お手元資料があるかと思いますが、なんか図が一部ずれているので、画面に、大きく4点なんですが、4点といっても1点目はですね、太陽光と風力発電中心に再エネを飛躍的に拡大させると。これを 100% というと、異論のある人も出てくるんですが、これを拡大することに多分異論はないと思いますので、1点目は今日議論しなくてもいい。で、2点目と3点目と4点目が今日の中心ですが、この太陽光と風力、とりわけ太陽光ですね、今日の中心は、を拡大していく上で、先ほどフランスの例でもありましたが、住宅とか駐車場とかですね、ニッチな場所を広げていっても、それでは足りないと。どうしても農地の活用というのは、太陽光の拡大の観点からも必要ですし、農業を今度、支援していくっていうことですね。そういう観点からも必要なんですが、ただ現状は今日午前中、某政党での議論でもあったんですが、日本ののどかな田園風景には太陽光パネルは合わないといった異論があります。ただ現実見るとですね、あれだけビニールハウスがどこに行ってもあって、実はかつての田園風景と全く変わってきているので、そういったことも考えなきゃいけない。ただ、社会的合意っていうのは非常に重要なので、これをどう形成していくか。で、さらに、これからさらに飛躍していこうとすると、様々な規制的な障害というか課題がある中で、農業、農家、そして地域に資するような営農型太陽光発電をどのように、支援的な制度に作っていくのかと。 今日朝からもずっと議論になっているのは、一時的に日本の場合は農地転用ってこの筒のとこだけするんですけれども、それは基本的には海外にはないが、ここら辺をどう考えるか。それから 80% 終了基準っていうのがですね、非常に厳しいでですね、これをどういうふうに見直していくのかということで、あとペーパー用意してるんですが、これ全部話をすると時間がないので、やめておきます。あとは議論に、委ねていきますと。そうですね。はい、以上です。
それではですね、今問題提起があったので、ちょっと上から行きましょうかね。1番ちょっと置いとくにしてもですね、2番目から行きましょうか。1番も2番もコンセンサスの形成ということなんですけれども、マックスもですね、ずっと言ってるように、ステークホルダーたくさんいますよね。で、もちろん、農民でも大きな農場を持ってる人、小さな農場の人、それから、やはり、業態で言えばですね、発電業界、それからやっぱり農業を重視したい。で、そういった、外部の人とか、それから地元の人、いろんな、人がいると思うんですけれども、そういったコンセンサスを作るのにどういった、ことをしていくのが一番いいと思われますか？
I'm not sure if I can answer this. What's the most important thing for consensus? But at least events like this today, to exchange and to understand what the other parties need or the other stakeholders, it's a very important step towards this. And I would like to address this issue regarding the landscape impact. I think that's just one out of many examples how that we have to take these concerns serious, even though we know that there is no way around it, but there are a lot of strategies how we could alleviate those concerns, to find agreements also here that maybe some areas are no-go areas, and that's maybe a part of the deal to allow agrivoltaics in other areas or PV in general. So also this question, how to build a consensus, might vary from region to region. Maybe there are also regions where they don't need farmland for agrivoltaics, because they have other sources. They have a lot of wind, a lot of rooftop, maybe other sources like hydro energy. But overall, I'm convinced that agrivoltaic will play a role, but we have to make this in a sensitive way and not overrule some concerns which might not seem valid, because I'm also convinced that this will fall back to us, because as we also discussed in previous meetings, social acceptance is a very crucial aspect of the development in the next decades, especially because there's still such a long way to go. So even though it's maybe hard sometimes to consider those aspects, we cannot ignore them simply.
Yeah, I would like to share with you a bad experience that we had very recently about that. That will illustrate how social acceptance is a complicated issue. We had a project, it was accepted, it was funded on 4 hectares close to Montpellier, my city. And finally, the mayor of the city, of the local place, decided not to go. And what was the reason? Because he felt that it looks like a forest of steel posts. And that was something we explained. No, of course, it will produce vegetables for the children of your schools and so and so. But no, it doesn't look like, didn't like the look of it. So that's a key point. And at the moment, I quite share this concern, because when you bring elected people, mayors and representatives to these places, they often say, oh, it's ugly. It's ugly even when you go in winter, because in winter there is no crop. In summer, it's more amenable, you know. So that's a problem. And we are thinking with some companies to build the structures in wood. Just like the first prototype that you have seen, it's in wood. And in this prototype, people say, oh, it's beautiful, just because it's in wood. So that's an example of where you have to go. And I have a second point from that. We have also a lot of projects, not yet agrivoltaics, because agrivoltaics is quite new, but ground-mounted photovoltaics. They raise very often contestation, local contestation. But there is one case where you have no contestation. It's when local people finance it. Maybe not 100%, maybe only 20% of it, but they all have a share in the finance. And in that case, it's much more easy to get social acceptance. And we have such projects that are very nice, including now in agrivoltaics, where you have that. But the key problem is there, is the project still profitable for the electricity company? That's the nœud gordien. That's the key question that we need to address.
Yeah, thank you both. As I think about this question and building off of that community sentiment a little bit, I think we can also start to think about a two-prong approach where we're understanding that social acceptance is so important. And so really understanding what communities need and what they want is extremely important. So engaging with them from the very beginning. And so this is more of a bottom-up approach, so the first prong of that. And at the same time, on the opposite end of the spectrum is a top-down approach, which would be the government saying, or an entity, a developer saying, this is what we're doing, right? And I think that both of those need to happen at kind of simultaneously at the same time for a project to work out, and maybe some engagement and a little bit of back and forth there as well. So bottom up and top down. I think in the top down side of things, if you do have some government involvement and there's research involved there, it's very important to have an aspect of education as well, to get the word out, and research and education, right? So do the due diligence of the research and then disseminate that information.
トーマス、今の最後の、教育、エデュケーションの部分なんですけど、アメリカはですね、まずアリゾナ大学でバイオスピア2を使って、周辺の、パブリックスクールとか学校を巻き込んだようなね、そういった、サマースクールやったりとか、してると思うんですけど、その上に、ついこの前、コロラドアグリボルティクスラーニングセンターっていうのを設立されて、非常に研究だけじゃなくてですね、周辺の住民であるとか学校であるとか、そういうところの教育っていうのに力を入れたいと思うんですけど、それはなぜで、効果、どういったことを期待されていますか？
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I think that places like the Biosphere 2 and also Jack's Solar Garden are prime examples of both community engagement and research happening at the same time. And so the impact it's having has been tremendous, actually. I can speak to Jack's Solar Garden a little bit better, closer to me in Colorado, but it's an incredible site, and the work that Byron is doing there in the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center is doing, they're bringing in schools and of all different ages, even universities, and also, of course, engaging with NREL, engaging with University of Arizona, Colorado State, to be this central hub of information sharing and community engagement. And next year, I'm very much looking forward to the international conference when we get to visit that site and hopefully maybe have a dinner there and really get to know the site well.
That's great. ありがとうございます。 ですね、台湾の李博士にはですね、ちょっと今日発表いただく時間がなくて大変申し訳なかったんですけども、台湾はですね、非常に水上ソーラー、特に養殖ソーラーですね。それが進んでるんですね。それには、ネガティブな理由もあって、台湾はですね、地上設置型の営農ソーラーというのもほぼ禁止されている状態なんです。だから、我々からしてみたらば、いわゆる、ある意味では失敗したケースかなというふうに思ってるんですけども、なぜその台湾でですね、そのように地上設置型のソーラーシェアリングというのが禁止されてしまったのか、そこら辺のいきさつと、これからどうしていきたいと思っていらっしゃるかを聞かせてください。
Why agri-PV prohibit in Taiwan? I think broadly speaking, we have agri-PV in Taiwan because we can count that like a greenhouse. We have rooftop type of PV. Yeah, that's like some kind of agri-PV. Yeah. But narrowly, I know you mean agri-PV means that ground mount PV on the farmland or something like that. Why we don't have? I think because in past few years we used to have agri-PV. Once maybe in 2013, 2014, we have lot of case project site, but at that moment, I think our regulations and our regulations are not that complete, so that caused many controversies about PV from the public. So the government then turned their attitude. So at that moment, because at that moment the aqua PV regulations are complete, so they try to they think that we promote that aqua PV first, and then maybe later we can after the regulations of agri PV is complete, then we have to keep trying on agri PV and then see how aqua PV goes with our regulations, and we have a mechanism of the environmental and social inspections for that. We developed that mechanism to reduce the environmental and social conflicts, but we are not in very beginnings, so we would like to see the result. If that the mechanism is work in aqua PV, then maybe we can we can learn from it to promote agri PV in the future.
ありがとうございます。ちょっと答えづらい質問だったかもしれません。私がちょっと聞いてる話では、やはり、太陽光発電を進行しようと思ったら、かなり土地の投機が起こって、で、農地にもですね、どんどん立って、で、非常にそれ悪い形の開発が起きたんで、世論も、それから環境団体なんかもですね、もう全体がもう反対して、これやっちゃいかんというふうになったというふうに伺ってるんですね。先ほどクリスチャンもね、言ってましたけど、うまくやらないと土地の投機が起きて、農地が台無しになってしまうと、そういうレントなんかもね、一定程度に抑えた方がいいんじゃないかというような話があったんで、そこら辺のことがちょっと関係あるのかなという気がしたんで、質問しました。クリスチャンはどう思いますかね、それに。
Yes, these problems of the cost of the land, the opportunity cost of the land is very important. But what is more important is that the APV opportunity will be limited in time. We won't do millions of hectares of APV in the future. So there is a cake that we need to share now. And that's where policy comes into the story. Because if we leave the market to do that freely, only powerful farmers will get it. That's what we see in France. It's very important. And when I said a moment ago that co-financing by locals is important, it could also be co-financing by local neighbor farmers who have no agrivoltaics on their farm, but it's their neighbor who has it, but they share the project and they are also co-financers, so they get money from the electricity. So that's a way to share it. We won't do huge areas of agrivoltaics around the world. We will do a limited areas, and that's, we should think right now about regulations to share that. If not, the first come will be the first served, and the first coming are not always the good boys.
はい。ですね、ちょっと次の質問に移りたいと思います。何か今の点についてフロアから意見あれば聞きますけれども、ちょっと次の質問もやってからしましょうかね。日本で今すごい問題になっているのは、この4番目に、提起された、この一農地転用と 80% の終了目標ですね。これが非常に障害になってなかなか進まないんじゃないかという話が、よくされます。で、もちろんこれ農地を守る、農業を守るという意味で必要だからこうやってやられてるわけなんですけど、これに代わるですね、もっといい方法がないかと。もうこれ大変なんですね。銀行もですね、なかなか金を貸しづらいんです。で、銀行が金を貸してくれないと事業ができないということがあります。で、フィットの価格が良かった時はいいんですけれども、これが落ちてくるとですね、どんどん銀行が貸しぶりをするような状態になってきて、なかなか開発する、業者さんも入れないし、それからもっと言えば、農家さんですよね。農家さんもう資本ないですから、特に小さな農家とかないんで、初期投資をしてくれて、ちゃんとファイナンスしてくれるようなところがないとできないんですけれども、この、農地転用の障害と、この終了基準ですね。終了基準。これが、障害になってるんですけども、これをどうしたらいいのかなって。で、日本がちょっと先行してたんで、皆さんに事例を紹介したらば、フランスもドイツもですね、イタリアも、ちょっとやっぱり日本のね、制度を勉強しつつ、そういった終了基準なんかも入ったんじゃないかなというふうに感じてるんですけども、日本の制度が全て 100% やっぱりいいわけじゃないんで、これからやはり、より制度をちょっとね、作っていきたいと思うんですが、ここら辺の問題、今ね、どう考えてるか、まだドイツなんかも66% って言ったこと決まってないですよね。で、フランスなんかもグランドカバレッジレーション 30% にしようか 40% にしようか。で、そこをどうしたらいいのかっていうようなことを今試案している時だと思うんですが、だからこれを、で、もう一つ言えばさっきクリスチャンがですね、パネルの容量を制限したいじゃないか。ね。だから終了じゃなくて、それで農業を保護するようにした方がいいんじゃないかって。それも一つのアイデアだと思うんですが、そこらについてちょっと皆さんの意見をお伺いしたいと思います。はい、
Thanks, Makoto. Yeah, that's the crucial question of regulating agrivoltaics. I personally don't believe that clear quotas on panel surfaces, for example, are the solution because their agrivoltaics and climates are too different. And we should not restrict the technology too much. If we have such quota, it should be also taking into account the respective crops, the climate and water availability, for example. But coming to the question, if the 80% are appropriated or not, I think it's much more important how you deal with these quotas. And that's one of the very interesting lessons we have learned today from the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, that the sanctionizing mechanism here is not as strict as I thought before, but that farmers who are not able to meet this 80% getting support, and the controlling bodies are having a more close look. So why weren't you able to receive this 80%, and how can we support, how you could adjust and improve your cultivation methods and so on. And I think it's very important for attracting investors into agrivoltaics that the punishment is somehow in accordance to how you were not able to meet these quotas. So if you maybe just end up with 79%, it would be completely unrealistic to shut down the facility and have a strict punishment, but more going into a direction that a gradient, if you just reach 70%, for example, then they have a higher punishment, then you end up with 75 or something like this, to incentivize people to get as good as possible, but at the same time to not scare too much of the investment which we need to implement all the PV capacity for the future. And things like this, I think, are very much into the core of the discussion. And you said, did you reflect this in Germany? Yes, we reflected this for a very long time, but we didn't experience this. And you experienced this. And so that's why we are so thankful for these discussions. And I have the impression, Christian, you directly want to add on this? Yeah?
May I? Yes. So we hear from you first, and then we want to hear from the floor too. And then, no, you can go. Three of you speak first, and then we can take an opinion from lawmakers, decision makers, and then government officials, and the floors now.
Yeah, this is a crucial point. I disagree with Max. I think we have a different approach. If you build a system that can produce a lot of electricity prices are so high compared to crop products prices that electricity will come on the system. So my opinion is that it's safer to constrain the system from the beginning by limiting the density of solar panels on the cropland. And in that case, you always have enough sun for the crops, and the crops will always be profitable. They will always be attractive for the farmer. We have had a number of projects in France where after some years, the farmers stopped to grow because there was too much shade. So my opinion is that limiting the density of panels is a good option. It's easier to control than to control the yield of the crops. It cannot be changed. And it's true also for mobile panels on trackers, because if you have mobile panels and you say, okay, I will manage the trackers to give light to the crops, that's written, but in reality, what are you doing? So how to control that? So it's the same problem with the trackers. The companies that promote trackers say, no, we can put as many panels as we want because we can provide light to the crops. But who knows? Who will have the button to move the trackers? That's a question.
Yes, thank you. In the US, we do not have any particular yield percentage standards at this point, but we are paying attention to what other countries are doing, both Germany and Japan, and learning from that. I'm not sure which approach we will take in the long run, if it will be more of a panel density approach or a yield approach, but I would, I'm taking the personal perspective to remain open to all of these frameworks. and would encourage everyone else to do the same. You know, it's generally the common answer is always like, it depends. So it's kind of a case-by-case basis, and we're seeing that in the US as well. As from the map that I showed earlier, you can see just how much diversity we have in irradiance across our country. So what we have in the US, we might need to create our own framework or maybe a framework on a state-by-state basis. But just thinking about that from a technical perspective, if you have a certain panel density, say for us in Washington State or more northern latitude, and you kept that same panel density and you brought it to the South, Texas or Florida, you would have drastically different light conditions. So again, my personal perspective, I am an advocate for modeling these scenarios similar to what the state of Massachusetts has done, so we can really start to understand the microclimate before that system goes out into the world.
Okay, thank you. ちょっとですね、フロアからもう一人だけ意見をいただいてから、議員さんの方々とか、省庁の方々にご意見いただきたいと思います。じゃあ、ステファン、手挙げてた。はい、ステファンからどうぞ。
Yes, thank you so much for the House of Representatives and also for ISEP for holding this very important dialogue on solar sharing AKPV. My name is Stefan. I work for a German agricultural and renewable energy company called BayWa. The BayWa Group is developing AKPV globally, and in Japan we would like to expand our investment. However, we can not do that mainly for two reasons. First challenge is permitting. In a poly crisis, we demand poly solution, and solar sharing, we believe, is such a solution. However, very often policymakers only knows monofunctional land use, so either or. Solar sharing, I think, is known now in Japan, but the laws and the regulation are not in place within the permitting on local authority level to really contribute to multifunctional land use. This means that also in heritage tax, the land really where solar sharing is built should remain farmland and not be converted in spatial planning to special zones or industrial area, because that's really not treating the farmland as it is in solar sharing. Second point is finance, very important point. And I say this because we go to medium-sized, large-scale solar sharing in Japan. We would love to invest more into that dual use of land. However, the 80% rule is really shifting all the risk of the investment to the farmer, on the shoulders of the farmer. But the farmer cannot cope with multi-million investment for solar sharing. If he is not achieving 80%, he has to bring warranty that we achieve the 80%. But how should the farmer know in the next 20 years that he will achieve 80% if we face climate change, droughts, if he's facing health problems maybe, if he's aging? And we cannot keep a farmer up running in our systems if we do multi-million investment, to be honest. So the banks don't go along with us. Japanese banks don't go along with us because of the Japanese regulation not enabling solar sharing. And Christian, I have to disagree, because I think it's a very bad idea to limit the amount of PV panels per area, because when we, for instance, in blueberry production or in horticulture, we use the panels to protect the crops. So we need a high density of panels. We have light transparent panels, which is very innovative. And also in solar grazing with sheep or in cow voltaic, we can reef shade to animal welfare. We will face more heat and droughts in future, so shade is actually beneficial. So I don't think it's good to limit innovation and to limit technology approaches in the field of solar sharing. And to your question, who is having the button to press to shift away the tracker? It's the farmer having the button. When we do hay voltaic, and the sun is needed to dry the hay, the farmer is deciding to move out the tracker to provide sun to the hay when it's cutted. So really the farmer first, that's true, but we have to balance out the interests of solar investment and the farmer. And this unfortunately is not in place yet. Thank you for your time.
はい。 ちょっと、これからですね、国会議員と省庁の方々とか有識者の人に、コメントいただくので、ちょっと変わりました。今の論点はですね、実は今日、私さっき説明すればよかったんですが、白黒でコピーしてある一番最後の8ページのところに、営農型太陽光発電で最大の課題は、やはりその農地転用が必要となっていると。で、これはソーラーシェアリング、太陽光が農地にとって異物だから農地転用という、非常に日本的なきめ細かい規制なんですが、これを農業設備にしてしまえば農転は不要になるんじゃないかというのが第一点。それから終了基準 80% というこれ20年にわたって保証しないと、日本の場合即座に撤去。即座じゃないんですけど、指導が入るんですけども、でもその撤去されるリスクがあればバンカブルではないので、銀行から一切お金が出ないと。リスクがちょっとでもあれば銀行出ない。で、これを技術基準に変えてしまえばですね、少々複雑な技術基準でも、技術基準であればクリアできるんですが、終了基準は20年っていう未来は予測できないので、これは非常に難しいという、これはやはり政治家と省庁の方々は理解していただいた方がいいのかなと。あと、各地の農業委員会の認可というのがですね、もちろんこれは分散型で非常にいいんですけれども、あまりにも情報の格差が大きすぎて、で、時間が、我々、長野県で去年オープンしたやつについてはですね、農業委員会の認可に、地元の若い農家が2人やるソーラーシェアリングに5年かかりましたからね。もう全く、経済的ではないんですが、そういうですね、非常にその規制の見通しも立たない。これがその下に書いてあるように、ドイツに比べて日本は 2.5 倍太陽光の発電コストがかかるのは、ハードのコストよりソフトコスト、手続きとか規制のコストが非常に高いんですね。で、時間もコストなので、これをやはり、手続きをスムーズにする。しかし、環境破壊とかですね、農地を破壊するわけではない。そこのバランスを作るということが、この8ページで言いたかった。ということで、ぜひ、議員の皆さん、それから各省庁は今日朝から付き合っていただいたんですが、一言ずつコメントいただいたらと思いますが、菅さん、ぜひ、お願いします。
実は日本の農地法というのが、あるわけですけども、基本的に農地は日本の今の法律では農業以外に使えないことになってますが、今から10年前に例外を認めたんですね。農林省が。それは柱、つまり太陽光パネルを並べる枠組みを作る柱の下だけの宅地転用というのを認めたんです。従来は農地に全体として構造物を作れないというのが農地法の原則なんです。それを柱の下だけの宅地転用を11年ぐらい前に認めたんです。それによって、いわゆる農地の上に柱を立てて、そして上で太陽光発電が可能になったんです。で、農業は少なくとも従来通り、あるいは従来に比べて、2割3割の収量が減っても仕方ありませんが、その程度ちゃんとやりなさいというのが農林省の基本的考え方だった。私10年ぐらい前からこの問題非常に関心を持って見てきましたので。ですからそういう意味ではですね、今日本でものすごくこの営農型太陽光発電が広がったのは、そういう柱の下だけの宅地転用というのを認めたからだと私は思っています。ですから各国によって土地利用の法律は違いますけども、日本は非常に農地については厳しかったんですが、その厳しいこの原則の中で、その柱の下だけの宅地転用を認めたことによって、私はずっと広がっていると。ですから私があちこち見てきてますけども、特になんて言いましょうか、下である程度の農業を続けている限りは、宅地転用をどんどん禁止されているという例は、私が見る限りそんなに多くありません。ですから土地で、日本は農地と農地以外の法律は全く違うんです。ですから農地に関して非常に厳しい制約があったのが、今申し上げたように、柱の下だけの宅地転用を認めたことによって、非常に自由度が増して、それが今の日本における営農型太陽光発電がかなり拡大している原因だと思いますし、これはもっともっと同じやり方でも進めることができると これが私の考え方です。
他に、山崎さん。
衆議院の山崎です。朝もお話を聞きましたんで、ちょっと遅れてきましたけれど、私が思ってるのは、80% っていう基準は、あまり私数字には意味がないんじゃないかなと思っておりまして、要するに農水省の考えとして、みんな同じだと思うんですけど、とにかくちゃんと農業やってねと。で、農地をきちっとやっぱり維持をするということを担保するために、そういう数字を掲げているので、例えばそれがちゃんと営農ができているということが確認できれば、それが 60% か 70% か 50% かっていうのは、私はそれほど重要なんではないんじゃないかなっていうことはちょっと思ってまして、だからなんかそこはもう少し今日午前中の議論の中でも土壌のお話とかあったと思うんですけど、農地として本当にね、きちっと維持できているってことが他になんか担保できることがあれば、私はそれを基準にしてソーラーシェアリングというのを認めていくっていうのはあるんじゃないかなっていうふうにもちょっと思っています。それからぜひ皆さんお聞きしたの作物の適比ってありますよね。でどんなものを作っていく工作して作っていくかっていうものをどんな例えばデータベースとかですね、データを取って、地域だとか、いろいろ気候条件とかあるとは思うんですけど、なんかそういったデータをみんなで共有して、それが、なんていうのかね、広まって、ソーラーシェアリングの、好事例が広がっていくのはいいんじゃないかなと思っていまして、そういう、情報をどういうふうに皆さん、管理されているかなっていう話。あと、やっぱり牧草地で家畜とのこの共生というのは非常にいいアイディアだなと思っておりまして、そういったものを日本ではまだあまり例としてはないんじゃないかなと思ったので、そのあたりが日本でももっと参考にできればなっていうふうに思いました。ぜひどんな作物をっていうところは皆さんのお考えを少しお聞きできればと思います。
Thank you so much for these very, very important comments. In most of the economies in Japan and the rest of the world, we hopefully base our decisions on knowledge and findings. In agrivoltaics, in Asia, it was rather based on assumptions and experiences. And in Europe, where especially Thomas, Christian, and myself are active with our research, it's quite the other way around, that there is very little experience, but we spend a lot of time into investigating agrivoltaics. And obviously, agrivoltaics is no rocket science. It's just an application which integrates PV and agriculture, but the implications that go along with this are still pretty complex. From a legal point of view, from an economic point of view, and also from a technical point of view, there is a lot we have to consider. And to get there, to make the right decisions and to optimize systems, we have to know more about all of the aspects. And we hope that the event today can also contribute a bit, that Japan is collecting more data to collect these experiences which are already there, to make it accessible for research, for developers, because the questions you raised are the same as for us. Which crops perform better? Which module coverage ratios are suitable for which areas, for which crops? We have some ideas. There are some papers around. Laub et al., for example, they had a beautiful paper just 1 or 2 years ago, which are tackling this question. But to provide really sound answers, we need more data, we need more research, even though it might seem that agrivoltaics is not a very deep science, but it's a very broad science. And for that, we also need some resources and platforms to do so. And maybe at this point, I would also ask the people here in the room, what would be needed to get there? What would be appropriated platforms to continue and maybe even deepen our discussions? And I see already next to myself, Christian already moves. Maybe you have an answer for that or an idea?
No, but I can give you examples. Everybody asks, what crop could I grow under the panels? That's the universal question everybody asks. The problem as an agronomist is that my answer will be, it depends. It depends on a lot of things. And for example, we have done 2 PhD theses on salad cultivation under panels. We have been studying 7 different types of salads, and each type has a different answer. Even in the same species, the variety has different answers. So as when you have a deep shade, a quite important shade, 50% of shade, 40% of shade, the result will be difficult to extrapolate. When you have only 10% of shade, it's almost as if there is no shade. So the crop is okay. So in between 50% and 10%, where is the limit for each crop? Each crop is different. And usually in agriculture, you do rotation. Don't crop the same species every year at the same place for many reasons. So there is not a very simple answer to your question unless you have not too many panels on the plot. Okay, so you can do anything. I finished because I agree with Stefan. Some species like blueberries, raspberries, and fruit trees and vineyards seems to agree with high density panels. But we need more years to check if it's universal. So we can make rules depending on the crop, on the species, of course.
では、片さんお願いします。
参議院議員の加田由紀子でございます。なかなか時間が取れなくて、ちょっと一部しか参加できなかったんですけれども、2点、今山崎さんの話とつなげて、まず1点目ですが、この作物については結構研究をしていて、それで、例えば印樹という榊であるとか、日本で神様にお供えする、あるいはみょうがであるとか、これなんかはぴったり印樹として、適切だ。で、米でもこれから太陽光が強すぎると地域によっては2割ぐらいカットする方が米の収量多くなるというそういう結果もありますので、ここのところは結構すでにデータを出していると思います。私の知り合いも榊とそれから、仏さんにお供えするのをやって経営成り立たせてます。で、そういうもの以上に実は今現場で頭が痛いのは、もう世代代わりで米が作れなくなって、田んぼ作れなくなる。そうすると、1ヘクタールとか2ヘクタールを、太陽光を開発する会社が購入して、そして虫食いのソーラーが田んぼの中に、特に棚田なんかにたくさん出てるんですね。で、これの方がよっぽど景観破壊なんですね。そのあたりのところ、ちょっと現場で十分できてないんですけれども、決して、特に水田地帯の棚田地帯などは、もっともっと計画的にやったらいいのに、行政指導もできていないというのを、ちょっと私も反省をしております。現場では、どんどん個別の転用が進んでます。で、森林も一部分どんどん虫食いで、それから今、養魚場とか、経営的に成り立たなくなったところが、またたくさん虫食いで広がってますよね。このあたりのところ、それの方がよっぽど景観的に問題ではないかというのが現場からの、問題提起です。で、それが今自分でも政治家としてできてないので、反省してるんですが、ただ景観のことを言うと、木製の木で ポールでという話をさっきしてらした。これは逆に結構現場で受け入れられるかなと。金属的な風景が特に水田農村などではあまり歓迎されないので、しかも、間伐材というのがあるんですけど、間伐材なんかで工夫したら地元で循環できるんじゃないのかなというようなことも今日いいヒントいただきましたので、これはまた提案を地元でしていきたいと思います。少し長くなりましたけど、以上です。参議院の加田由紀子でした。皆さんのお話、大変ありがたかったです。特にドイツは私も随分勉強させてもらったんですけれども、やっぱり合理的なことは広がるんだという、その辺の原理は心強く思いました。ありがとうございます。
今日あと、農水省、経産省、環境省の皆さんには朝からずっとお付き合いいただいたので、それぞれ一言ずつコメントいただければと思います。
資源エネルギー庁新エネルギー課でございます。本日、いろいろプレゼンテーションを聞かせていただきまして、改めましてありがとうございました。再生可能エネルギー政策という観点から小と申し上げさせていただければと思います。再エネの導入にあたりましては、地域との共生が大前提ということでございまして、地元の住民の方のご理解ですとか、もしくは関係法令遵守、こういったところをしっかり事業者の方に実施していただいた上で、導入を拡大していくということが、持続的なですね、今後の再生可能エネルギーの導入につながっていくということで考えてございます。営農型につきましても、こういった観点で、しっかりと営農と太陽光発電を両立していただいて、農業政策との整合性、こういったところもしっかりと取りながら、いい営農型太陽光発電の導入というのが拡大してくるというところに向けて取り組んでいきたいと思っております。以上でございます。
環境省、畠山と申します。本日はありがとうございました。環境省としてはもちろんですね、2050年のカーボンニュートラルに向けて再エネの最大限の導入というところだと思っております。で、ソーラーシェアリングはもちろんですし、例えばですけど、今日も話題にありましたけど、ため池とかですね、水上のものですとか、あるいは駐車場とかですね、様々な支援させていただきたいなと思っております。ただ、一方でやはり大前提となるのは地元との理解、あるいはいかにその地域との地域活性化につながるかというですね、そういう観点がやはり一番重要なのではないかなと思っておりますので、営農型の太陽光の支援、後押し、促進という観点もですね、結局そういったものを踏まえた上で、いかにバランス取ってやっていくかということはですね、環境省としてもそこ非常に重要だと考えてございます。経産省さん、農水省さんとも引き続きですね、密に連携しながら、いろんなところで後押しさせていただきたいなと思っております。以上です。
農林水産省でございます。私、農地転用の方を担当させていただいてまして、本日、議題のですね、4つ目に、一時転用と 80% 終了の基準っていうことが書いてある。やっぱりこれがあるんだなと、今日もちょっと責められるんだなということで、ちょっとドキッとしたところでございますけども、農地の制度につきましては、先ほど菅先生がおっしゃられた通りでございまして、いわゆる有料農地、相当程度の集団性がある農地ですとか、基盤整備が行われた農地、これを有料農地と呼んでいるわけでございますが、これにつきましては、基本的にですね、転用は、認めないという、扱いになっているところでございますが、平成25年にですね、営農型をですね、一時転用という形で認めていこうということで、措置をさせていただいたということでございます。やはり、我々の立場といたしましては、できるだけその有料農地はですね、有料のまま、維持していきたいという思いがございまして、やはり、営農をしっかりやっていただくということをですね、これからもお願いしながら、営農型もですね、認めるところは認めていこうというふうに、進めていくべきではないかというふうに思っておりますので、推進する、皆様方とですね、規制する我々と、できるだけその辺を折り合いをつけながら進めていければなというふうに思っておりますので、今後ともよろしくお願いいたします。
はい、ありがとうございました。everyone can。じゃあ、菅さん。
今の農林省の担当者のお話はですね、私もだいぶある時期から、農地法というのを勉強したことがあるんですね。で、皆さんもちろん専門家ですからお分かりだと思いますけれども、先ほど申し上げたように、下で農業をやりながらですね、上で柱のところだけを転用して、上で作れば、下でちゃんとしたものを作らなきゃいけるというのは、今でもほとんど耕作放棄地というのは、もうご存知のようにたくさんあるわけですよ。それは農民がいなくなってるからなんですよ。土地がなくなってるからじゃないんです。逆に、営農型太陽光発電というのはそこに柱を立てて太陽で電気をすると、そちらの収入が場合によったらですね、多いぐらいで、場合によってはそれが目的で逆に農業もですね、ある程度農業してないと農林省がおかしいじゃないかというからですね。だから私はそういう意味ではもっとですね、ポジティブに考えた方がいいなと思うんです。つまりは、農業だけで生活ができるような今農業っていうのは非常に少ないですから、北海道とかの農業は。ですからちゃんと営農型である程度の収入が得られて、そして農業でもある程度プラスアラワになって、でそれでお互いがと言いましょうか、エネルギー問題としてもやれるというですね、そういうことの折り合いを、私は農林省はこの間は、先ほども申し上げましたけど、農地転用をですね、柱の下だけ認めたっていうのは、私はね、もうびっくりしたんです、それ知ったときに。ある意味で英断ですよね。かつてはあれでしょ、工作物が作れなかったでしょ、農地には。工作物が作れなかったら、太陽光発電は農地ではできないんですよ。それを変えたことによってこれだけ広がってきてますから、私はもうちょっとポジティブに考えていただいた方がいいんじゃないかと思ってます。
はい、anyone can something respond? Something closing word? Of course you can.
I will start with some very few closing words here. Again, just wanted to express all my gratitude to be here. This is so exciting to share this platform, share information, and I hope it sets a new standard for information sharing moving forward. Thank you to the moderators and thank you to the translators that have been with us all day. This is possible because of you, so thank you.
Yes, I'm very impressed by the quality of the discussion. You know the problem, we know the problem, we know where we have to find solutions. Sometimes they are not technical solutions. For example, when you go to agrivoltaics, land is not a limit. You won't cover Japan with agrivoltaics. You will have a very small part of your country in agrivoltaics. So if you want to put 50% ground coverage ratio in a system on 1 hectare, why not to put half of that on 2 hectares? And you have the guarantee that the crop yield will be correct. The problem for the companies, for developers, is the cost of the structure. So the companies who will win the system, if we regulate it, are the companies who will design cheap structures. So that's our feeling at the moment in France. And companies do a lot of efforts to improve, to decrease the cost of the structures. So maybe one day we'll see.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Since Taiwan is, I think is I don't know if it's the first country to do the aquavoltaic PV regulations, but since we have no information to reference, so we learn from each country's their agriculture regulations, and most of, because Taiwan is so similar to Japan, we have many like social conditions or environmental conditions were a lot in common, and so we learn from Japan, yeah, as well. And maybe maybe 2 or 3 years later, I hope Taiwan can share our aquavoltaic experience to other countries, and then we can move on to agriculture as well. Thank you.
Thanks also from my side, dear ministries, dear House of Representatives, and Upper House also, and dear, he's just leaving, former President. Again, we've been longing for a very long time to get this look into Japan and the development of agrivoltaics. We are very thankful for getting this look last days, for having these great discussions. And we're very optimistic to continue this exchange. And particularly, I'm glad that we got to a point where experts had a different opinion, because then we know we are really close to the core of the discussion. And I would like to connect there in the next possibilities that we do have. Particularly, I would like to thank Makoto Tajima, who is our link to the Japanese world and who made all this possible. Thanks so much, Makoto, for being part of our community.
皆さんありがとうございました。ですね、私がこういう役回りし始めたのは2020年からなんですけど、本当は日本国内でですね、営農ソーラーシェアリング頑張ってる方、たくさんいらっしゃるんですよね。ただ、日本からなかなか情報が出ていかないと。で、その役を買って、義務感からこういうことやってたら、こんなに大きくなってしまったということです。で、どんどんですね、やはり今、我々同じ時代にやっぱり生きていて、同じ課題が、各国あるんですよね。で、それ力を合わせて、社会的な課題、技術的な課題、政治的な課題もあります。そういったものを一緒に知恵を出しながら解いていって、業界全体、産業全体が発展できたらいいなというのが、私の願いです。皆さんにもですね、これを機会に海外の方ともお付き合いいただいて、共にオープンイノベーションを起こしていけるような、新しい明日を作っていけるような動きができたらいいなと思ってますので、ぜひ、お友達になってください。はい。よろしくお願いします。どうも。ありがとうございました。
はい。では、本日は、原発ゼロ再エネ100の会と有識者で開催させていただきましたが、最後ですので、ただいまの日本の政治状況を少しだけコメントして、今日やっていただいたこの集会の意義と意味を確認したいと思います。日本では今 GX トランスフォーメーションって言って、なんて言うんでしょうね。脱炭素電源を広めて、エネルギー構造を変えようということなんですが、この GX の G、なんと原発までも入れるということで、ちょっと違う。私たちは再エネを100にしたいというので、原発ゼロ再エネ100をやってまいりましたので、今日の皆様の世界的な潮流のお話は大変役に立ちました。で、私たちのまだやれてない課題は、アメリカからの報告にありましたが、連邦レベル、州レベル、地域レベル、こうやってレベル別に課題を分けていく。今ちょうど日本では統一地方選挙といって、地域の選挙が行われています。私たちは国会にいるので、国会で法律を作ったり、決まりを作っていますが、それが本当に普及していくためには、本当は今この選挙戦の最中にも、そうしたことがもっともっと論じられれば、定着、拡大するのだなと思って、今度次回はそうした地域からの声も入れて、皆さんとまたお話をできたらと思います。長時間にわたり、今日は朝から今までありがとうございました。本当に感謝します。終わらせていただきます。
はい。お待たせしました。記者の皆さん、オンラインの記者の皆さん見えないですが、ただいまより、記者会見を始めたいと思います。質問のある方は、手を挙げていただくか、どうしたらいいんだ？発言できますかね？声で。はい。じゃあ、手を挙げていただいて、誰も手上がんない。じゃあ、早いもん勝ちで、マイクオンにして喋ってください。じゃあ、石井さん、はい、朝日新聞の石井さん、まず、はい、お願いします。じゃあ、he's here. Okay. We take a first question from the floor.
先ほど、直接もお伺いしたんですけど、途上国の、ソーラーシェアリングっていうのはすごく可能性があるんだと思うんですけど、この辺の見通しとかですね、今後どうしていけばいいのか、エネルギーと食料両方必要としているところっていうのは世界中すごく多いと思うんで、そういうところにどういうふうに広げていけばいいかっていうのをちょっとお伺いしたいんですが。
もう、すでにいろいろやってる、フランホファーのマックスからまず、はい。
Thanks a lot. I would totally agree. The potential in the global south is immense. Solar irradiation is abundant. We need electricity. We need to protect the food production. The agriculture there is largely threatened by climate change already today, and it will be much more severe in the future. And technically, it's clear that we should expect a great rise of agrivoltaics in these areas, but the socio-economic challenges are as large as the technical potential. So we just discussed before the property rights, how we can secure them, how we could get the investments done with a limited capital stock, how we have the security for a longer run. The PV panels are there for 20, 30, maybe 40 years. This investment horizon doesn't exist in these countries usually. How we can convince farmers and train farmers to use agrivoltaics, to understand how it works, how to get consensus in those communities to operate such a system. So there's so many open questions which are about to be tackled in some first pilots, in Africa particularly. But in most countries, we know that agrivoltaics is not even known and there is not a single project yet. So I would expect in Africa maybe 5, maximum 10 systems installed today. And most of them are very small projects. So a lot of work in front of us. And I think we as a scientific community and pioneers like Japan would play a central role in order to also transport the idea of agrivoltaics in those regions of the world.
You have pilot project in Africa as well as Asia, right? Vietnam, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Gambia, Nigeria, Namibia. Yeah.
There are also projects led by ICRAF, the International Research Center for Agroforestry, who is taking this option seriously now. So there are other projects too, but they are still almost nothing. So just very, very, very start. There are a lot of, not really agrivoltaic systems, but PV systems for pumping water and so on. There are quite a lot already in those countries. So there is something, and it's very often not connected to the grid. So there are independent systems with storage facilities, batteries, and so on. So from that, we can start. And I think the potential is huge.
I'll quickly add on to that. I actually was going to comment on this possibility for microgrids with battery storage, because in these areas there's often an unreliable grid or maybe no grid at all. And along with that, when you add the solar, either on farmland or very close to these communities, and as Max mentioned a second ago, they're facing climate change maybe more so than other parts of the world. Then there's this opportunity there for new crops in new areas of the world where they may be able to grow some more shade tolerant crops, or maybe crops that they were growing before that it had become too hot to grow.
You have more comment, Max? No?
Just one comment on this very interesting country, India, which is very much aware of agrivoltaics today. I just was there 3 weeks ago, and they know about agrivoltaics. They're willing to implement this, and they're preparing some larger schemes to promote it. So if we look at this developing world, of course, India takes already a special role, but I think this would be one of the first countries pushing into that direction, which could be then again play a very important role for other countries who see this development there, that it's also working in a, let's say, less developed country.
中国ではだいぶ進んでるんですか？
はい、進んでます。中国がですね、設置容量で言ったら世界一です。もう2ギガ以上かな、今。3ギガぐらいいくかな。2ギガは
Times 10, probably. Times 10. So we expect 12, 13 gigawatts of agrivoltaics for narrow definition. So if we take a wider definition, including pollinator and biodiversity PV, it's probably almost 100 gigawatt today. Yeah. And I just had a discussion with a project developer about a 5 gigawatt agrivoltaics facility, which is planned in the central east of China. So the dimensions in China are a bit crazy, to be honest, but it's for a good reason, because they need a lot of energy. But I would not consider China as a developing country anymore. When I was there, yeah, like it's pretty developed in many regards.
そうですね。台湾からね、ちょっと話のあった養殖ソーラーなんかも、中国はもう規模が全然違いますね。もう700メガワットとか、そこも、将来的には、近い将来的には2ギガワットの養殖ソーラーになるという。で、電気、売電収入もしかることながら、養殖の収入もですね、25% くらい養殖の収入があるというので、非常に大規模にやってます。
ありがとうございます。
オンラインありますか？これ、質問聞けるんでしょうか？声出るんですかね？手挙げてもらっていいですか？手が誰も上がらないんですけど。10 of them, but chat, but nobody is raising hand.
いいですか？ですね、クリスチャン博士が、アグロフォレストリーとのお話をされたと思うんですけど、この、農業のやり方、コンザベーションアグリカルチャーとか、それからノーティルとか、そういう有機とかですね、こういう、農業のやり方と、ソーラーシェアリングっていうのは、いわばセットになっているものなんでしょうか。観光農業と、 というよりは、やっぱりそういうですね、なんか有機農業とかそういうものと、これは合うというか、マッチするようなものだというふうに考えていいんでしょうか。
Very smart question. Of course, you can do solar sharing with conventional agriculture, with chemical agriculture, but you can do solar sharing with organic farming. Probably having more shade on the land is beneficial to the organic content of the soil. So I think organic farming and solar sharing really fit together. Because you limit the excess heat, you limit this kind of constraints, and you can put more carbon into the soil. So I think there is, of course, no problem to mix the two, but I think they will really fit together very well.
はい、それではもう最後にもう一度オンラインの方で質問がある方は手を挙げるなり発言するなりしてください。ないようですね。はい。なぜかわかりませんが、ないようなので、それではもう、これで記者会見終了させていただいて結構ですかね。You want to say something?
Maybe just to add on what Christian said, I fully agree and would even raise two more arguments why agrivoltaics and organic farming go perfectly hand in hand. So first of all, the machinery employment regarding the width of the machinery is lower typically for agrivoltaics because they don't spray with the large machinery. So that makes it easier and cheaper to integrate it. Secondly, for interspace agrivoltaic systems, one argument is to increase biodiversity with these green stripes. However, if you spray with pesticides, 1 or 1.5 meters of a flower stripe won't add a lot of biodiversity, because if you spray it, there will be, if you're lucky, there are maybe 5 to 7 species of grass which are growing there. But if you go for organic, these flower stripes or grassland, green permanent grassland stripes, they really provide the biodiversity which would add this benefit here.
Thank you.
飛鳥先生、はい、何かコメントがある。はい、
ついでに質問してもよろしいですか。今、どんどんその太陽光パネルが軽量化して薄くなって、で、ペロブスカイトですかとか、あと透明なものができるとか、そういう技術的な発展がどういうふうにソーラーシェアリングに影響するか、もし逆にこういうのが今開発していて、こういうのができればものすごく発展するとか、そういう期待みたいなものがあれば教えていただく。あと、さっき木で作ればいいんじゃないかって話があったんですが、多分軽くなれば木でもいいのかもしれないんですけど、でも木で作るとすぐ壊れるような気もするので、そこら辺の、なんていうんですかね、技術的な見通しなり、こういうものに今期待している、こういうやり方があるとか、そういうのがあれば教えていただければと思います。大丈夫かな？ Understand? Okay.
Yes, it seems I was selected to answer this question, but I'm happy to do so. I'm actually researching some semi-transparent panel technologies in the United States, and you're absolutely right that they are coming out with many new technologies for semi-transparent solar panels, both silicon-based and also cadmium telluride and organic PV as well, so perovskite and similar. To the weight question, I don't think panels are necessarily getting lighter, but I think that different racking technologies are coming out that are able to incorporate these new module types. And I would say that adding transparency to the modules is a win for agrivoltaics. It is a good thing. I'm a big proponent of maintaining panel density, but adding transparency within the module instead of inter-module spacing. I think that more research needs to be done in the US and across the world before we can understand the impacts of that type of application, but I am certainly an advocate for that.
I add a little bit on that, Thomas, thanks. So the last years, one of the most important development in the PV module market for sure, for agrivoltaics for sure, was the bifacial modules, because producing electricity on both sides, if you already have to consider the light on the other side, obviously adds to the performance of these PV modules. So that's why here the bifacial panels for sure boost agrivoltaics to some degree. The development of this vertical approach we have seen in Japan and with Next to Sun was accompanying the delegation is just one example of those. But on the other hand, we have seen some developments which might speak against it. That's mainly that PV panels get larger and larger each year. So that would contradict a bit the goal of equal light distribution. But again, what speaks in favor of agrivoltaics is there is and there will be in the next decades still a price reduction of PV components. And on the other hand side, these cost factors like accessibility of land, the acceptance of local stakeholders that also has a price, this cost will increase. So that means we have much more arguments to consider also these facts, because PV itself, it's not so expensive, so we can adjust the PV components. And opportunities to do so are organic photovoltaics, the one what Thomas just mentioned, but also solar splitting approaches where we use the sun, the spectrum of the sun for PV and plants separately, and many more applications which we are just about to investigate. But I'm very sure that we will see a lot of these approaches in the future, and how fast we have access to them also depends on how much research opportunities we get.
どうもありがとうございます。言ってなんかまた別の質問なんですけど、今、0円で、初期コスト0円で、太陽光パネルを屋根の上に乗せられるようなサービスがあると、ビジネスモデルがあると思うんですけれど、そういうのが、日本で可能かとか、他の国でもうすでにあるかとか、もしそこら辺何かあれば教えていただければ。
はい。他の国のソーラーシェアリングではそのような例は今まだないようですね。
でも原理的にはできるような気がするんですけれど、そこら辺はどういうあれなんでしょうか。はい。基本的にだから屋根貸しみたいな感じで農地貸しっていうんでしょうかね。で、それが投機につながるとかいろんな問題もあるのかもしれないんですけれど、できないというかできてもいいような気がする。
はい。ノーコメントのようですが、なんか飯田さん。
それは逆に日本で一番ポピュラーな、いろんな EPC さんが農地を借りて発電をして地代を払うっていうモデルは、一番多いんじゃないかと。で、それが、やっぱり地域からいろいろ反発を受けるとかいうケースがあるので、できるだけ地産地消というか地域の人たちのオーナーシップとか、 に今シフトしようっていうふうになってるのかなと思います。
地産地消でそういう初期コストリース、ただはできないんでしょうかね。
初期コスト。
やっぱりね、初期投資が高いっていうのが結構大きな問題だっていうふうに聞くので、そこら辺がうまく解決できればと。
初期投資ゼロっていうのは結局、どういうファイナンスをするかだけのスキームの話なので、ゼロには絶対ならないですよね。自分が銀行から借りる場合には、それが余震が取れるかどうか。で、プロジェクトファイナンスで借りるんだったら、自分はあまり出さなくてもいいし、それをリースでやるのか、あるいは第三者に貸してやるかっていうスキームなので、それはあんまり本質ではないような、本質というか逆に既存のモデルに戻るような議論だと。
はい。はい。
はい。それではですね、時間も超過しておりますので、そろそろ終わりにしたいと思います。皆さん本当ありがとうございました。オンラインの方もちょっと質問を受けられなくて申し訳ございませんでした。はい。どうもありがとうございました。はい。